Robert, very good morning to you. Welcome to Morning Glory for the first time.
Good morning, great to be here.
Amazing times we seem to be living through. I mean, I came in this morning and I said, as we opened the show, it's probably the first morning that we haven't had any terrible violence to report from the night before. I don't know whether that means that, you know, we've reached the end of it, or whether it means it's a lull. But, I mean, it's been a terrible place to be at the moment in Britain. We haven't been affected by it in London, remarkably. But, I mean, there is anger out there. There are people who are behaving disgracefully, as you've said. There are equally people who just want their voices heard. And I think many of them are grateful that you've at least done what Keir Starmer hasn't yet done, which is to say everybody who's involved in any kind of violent activity has to be treated the same way.
Absolutely. Look, our country has witnessed terrible events in recent weeks, from the tragedy in Southport, and all our thoughts are still with the parents, the first responders and the community there who are still mourning from that appalling loss. But we should be calling out what's happened since without fear or favour. You know, whenever someone commits crime, walks on our streets with weapons, brawls with the police, smashes up shops, it's incumbent on political leaders like me and, frankly, the Prime Minister to be calling that out, whoever is doing it, wherever they're doing it. And we should all have the courage to say that. It is about the far right, but it's also sectarian gangs, which we've seen on the streets of some of our cities like Birmingham in recent days. And it's quite wrong for politicians to shy away from that, because we should be trying to unite the country and call out violence wherever we see it.
Right. And of course a lot of people are unhappy with the way the country has been stewarded, if you like, and some of that is aimed at the former Tory government. But it's not just about that. It's about cities in Britain. In London, for example, Sadiq Khan put out a message last night saying, you know, it's time to check in on your black, your Muslim and your minority friends, because this is a very bad time. And people in London see that and say, well, actually it's a bad time for everybody. Why are you just singling out one or two communities? And we've also this morning seen a video of Superintendent Emlyn Richards from the West Midlands Police actually admitting that they didn't send police officers to the troubles in Birmingham because they spoke to the community leaders and they told them they didn't need to, which is extraordinary. I mean, that's two-tier policing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I've been very critical of the police at different times over the last year or so, whether it was some of the responses to the protests here in London after October the 7th, or more recently. I do think right now politicians should be getting behind the police. They've got a difficult job to do. We should be backing them to the hilt. But there'll come a time where, once this violence has been quelled, let's hope that that is already happening now, as you say, where we need to step back and look at how this has been handled and whether it's been done in an equal manner. We want the police to be tackling violence and extremism without fear or favour. That is what the public expect of the police. It's also what the public expect of political leaders. We shouldn't have a situation where Jess Phillips, for example, the actual Home Office minister responsible for safeguarding and for violent crime, is appearing to justify or explain away sectarian gangs on the streets of her own constituency, harassing members of the public, holding weapons, intimidating female journalists.
Yeah.
That is completely wrong. And that kind of behaviour by politicians leads to people feeling ignored across our country, and that will only create space for the very extremists that she is fearful of, whether that be on the far right or elsewhere in political life, to rise up. And I want to make sure that we never have that space. We want parties of the centre right or the centre left, to be talking openly about these issues, whether it is extremism or whether it's about migration. And millions of people across our country have perfectly legitimate views and concerns about these issues, which we need to be addressing head on.
Well, one of the reasons why people are so angry, because I talk to people every single day, as you would expect on this show, and they have become disillusioned with the way that some of their communities have changed over the years, the way that the illegal migrants are coming to this country, even as we speak, by the hundreds every single day, and how, you know, yes, we saw people trying to burn down hotels, but I've spoken to other kind of community leaders who said, yeah, but it was never a good idea to put these people into hotels in the centre of cities in Britain anyway.
Well, I mean, let me be clear. There's no justification for any of the violence that's happened. You know, that is a disgrace.
Yeah.
And we should all call that out. However, entirely separate from that, there are perfectly legitimate concerns of the public about what's happened in recent years and frankly for decades with respect to migration, where governments of all political persuasions have said they were going to control and reduce the number of people coming to our country, only to do the opposite. And the last Conservative government was as much to blame for that as any other. It said that we were going to break this cycle of broken promises. It didn't do that. That was one of the reasons why I resigned ultimately at the end of last year from the cabinet, because I refused to be just another minister who made promises and broke them on migration. What I want to see now is an open debate on this subject, reasonable, where we choose our language with great care. We don't seek to inflame tensions. But what we do now is pursue an altogether different policy. I want the Conservative Party to have a policy of legally capping the number of people coming into our country in the tens of thousands, or indeed less than that, and to adopt a very robust policy on illegal migration, which may mean leaving the ECHR, for example, which I advocate, but doing whatever is necessary now to get a grip on this situation.
Yeah, and you say that you want to be transparent, but you also want to make sure that you're not using language which is likely to inflame. Is that why? Because we've got some text coming in now saying, why do you refer to these gangs as sectarian when they're actually Muslim gangs? Why can't you say Muslim gangs?
Well, I think there's a range of different communities that are part of them. Some are British Muslims, some are British Asians. Sectarian gangs is an expression, a way of capturing a number of different groups that are involved in them. But what I have done, unlike the Prime Minister, frankly, is to be very clear that although the far right are undoubtedly involved in some of the protests and riots and disturbances we've seen, and I have condemned that unequivocally, and there are other just general thugs and yobs and morons who've been involved in them, there are also these sectarian gangs. And it's only if we do that, and we're not squeamish or selective in the people that we call out, that we can maintain the public's trust. If you just choose the easy option of calling out one group or another, depending on your political persuasion, then we're going to lose the trust of the public. And above all, we're not going to tackle the root of the problem, which is that violence is violence. The police should be cracking down on this, stamping out this and taking back control of our streets.
Yeah, because losing control of the streets, I think, is an issue for an awful lot of people. You know, I've been saying today, you know, the shoplifting epidemic, the knife crime epidemic, you know, the trouble that some people have in their own communities. I've got a question from Mike in Portsmouth who says, what can communities do to get their voices heard, especially in areas where many illegal migrants are housed, about the lack of infrastructure services for the locals to use or for the protection of those locals? As soon as anyone talks about it, you're labelled far right, so they inevitably don't.
Yeah, well, I'm concerned by politicians and sections of the media who are trying to shut down debate on some of these subjects. It's happened to me when I've talked about, for example, Islamist extremism, a very serious challenge in this country. Some people have tried to shut me down. And I've argued for months, in fact years, that if parties of the centre-right or the centre-left don't tackle these serious challenges, then millions of our fellow citizens will feel ignored. That will fuel serious discontent, erode public trust in politics, and on the edges, it will lead to the rise of the far right. Just 2 weeks ago, in my response in Parliament to the King's Speech debate, I made that point, and dozens of Labour members of Parliament literally laughed at me for saying that. Well, they're not laughing now, because we see these problems flaring up on our streets, and that's why politicians need to have the courage to speak out and be clear about what's happening in our country.
And one of the reasons that people have been angered by many of the things that they've seen over the last few weeks is that incident at Manchester Airport. We were talking about it just this morning because there was a press conference held by Anwar Anwar, who's a very smart lawyer, very clever guy. We're not quite sure what the press conference was meant to be about. But, you know, people have seen the footage, video footage of these two men attacking police officers, punching them in the face repeatedly. And they're asking me the question, you know, why are these people not being charged? You know, Keir Starmer seems to be very hot on charging and convicting rioters very quickly, one of them for punching a police officer. But these two, seemingly, are still not charged. And there's a fear that the reason for that is that the reaction might not be very good in places like Rochdale.
Well, I do think that there's been some evidence in recent years of the police being more concerned about community relations than about robust enforcement of the law. That was one of the points I made, for example, with the protests that we saw last year after October the 7th. And that's very bad. That is corrosive to public trust in policing. I think at the moment the police are just trying to do their jobs. It's a very difficult situation across the country, and so politicians like myself should not be making the lives of the police more difficult, but there is a broader debate that we'll have when this violence is quelled, and I will certainly participate in that, because I want the police to be tackling violence wherever they see it and, you know, robustly enforcing our laws, whether it's general criminality or extremism.
The Sun this morning on the front page, you're inside it in another area, says it's time that anti-social media is forced to clean up its act, that social media sewers have to be kind of cleansed. People will agree with that in many ways, but some will say, does that mean it's the beginning of a clampdown on free speech?
Well, free speech is extremely important, and I don't want to see anything that makes it more difficult for you or I or any law-abiding member of the public to have an open debate about some of the issues we've been discussing today. You know, there are legitimate topics of national debate like migration, like extremism, where we must be able to discuss them reasonably and in a way which doesn't inflame tensions. However, undoubtedly some disinformation has been spread on social media. We have the right laws already in place. We've got the Online Safety Act that the last government passed. That gives significant powers to the authorities to take action where there is information spreading online which is false and which is likely to spread hate or lead to tensions. And so I want the authorities to be using those to ensure that they take action. I don't think we need new powers. I think we've got the powers now. Let's use them robustly.
And Elon Musk, of course, has famously called Keir Starmer two-tier Keir. Do you agree with him?
Well, look, I don't think it's helpful for me as a politician, as someone, in fact, aspiring to be leader of the opposition, to go around having nicknames about the Prime Minister. What I want the Prime Minister to do is to call out violence and extremism wherever he sees it, and not to be squeamish or selective. That kind of moral clarity is incredibly important in our leaders in situations right now. I haven't seen that from the Prime Minister. I need to see it, because that is the way that he can unite the country and rise to this moment of national crisis.
Final question for you from Peter in Croydon. Can you please ask Robert Jenrick, in what ways can the Tories put pressure on Labour? Honestly, Mike, we can't have 5 years of Labour with their divide and rule governance. Look what destruction they've done in only 5 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is extraordinary, and I can't believe how bad Keir Starmer has been being Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, he's already breaking his promises on taxes. They're clearly going to raise those for working people this autumn. They've changed the housing targets, so you're building fewer homes in the cities. They're harming our oil and gas industry on the high altar of net zero. Now they're responding, I think, poorly to these riots and protests across the country. I don't want to see 5 years of this Labour. I certainly do not want to see 10 years. And so it's critical that the Conservative Party create a proper, robust opposition, holding them to account, regaining the trust of the public, which has been lost, frankly, because we didn't deliver for them on a number of issues, including migration, but also the economy and the NHS. And we get into a position where we can take them on and defeat them at the next general election. And
what about reform? Is there any conversation that you could have with any of the Reform Party members in terms of how they're seeing the way the world is kind of unfolding in this country at the moment?
Well, I don't think that we should be merging with Reform or bringing Nigel Farage into the Conservative Party. I see Reform as a symptom, not a cause. The reason why Reform has prospered at the recent general election is that we, the Conservative Party, did not deliver on our promises on key issues like immigration. I want to change that. I want to demonstrate to the public that we have listened, we've learnt from our mistakes, that the Conservative Party, frankly, is under new management on those issues, and then bring back those Reform voters to the Conservative Party. I want my party to be the natural home for small C Conservatives right across our country. I believe that's possible. That's why I'm standing to be leader of the Conservatives.